The phone call that changed everything came at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Amara, we need you back. Please. The Johannesburg deal is falling apart." Marcus Rodriguez's voice cracked through my speaker, desperate and pleading. 2 weeks earlier, this same man had escorted me out of Pinnacle Energy's headquarters with a cardboard box in my hands and my dignity in tatters. I set down my coffee and smiled at the irony. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm quite busy with my new position. My name is Amara Okafor, and I'm 29 years old. For 3 years, I was the invisible backbone of every major international deal at Pinnacle Energy, one of Houston's most aggressive oil and gas companies. While my colleagues schmoozing clients over expensive dinners, I was the one who actually made their global partnerships possible. Most people think translation is just swapping words from one language to another. They're wrong. Real translation is cultural archaeology. It's understanding that when a Japanese executive says it will be difficult, he means absolutely not. It's knowing that a Russian businessman's 20-minute silence isn't rudeness, it's contemplation. It's recognizing when an Arabic phrase carries religious undertones that could make or break a billion-dollar deal. I spoke 7 languages fluently, but my real value wasn't in vocabulary, it was in the spaces between words, the cultural currents that could sink or sail entire negotiations. My grandfather, Thabo, had emigrated from the eastern Cape of South Africa in the 1960s, and he'd filled my childhood with stories told in melodic Xhosa, teaching me not just the language but the soul of his homeland. Every Sunday after church, Grandpa Thabo would sit me on his lap and tell me stories in Xhosa about the Ubuntu philosophy, how we're all interconnected, how respect and dignity flow both ways in every relationship. He'd explain the subtle differences between Sabobona and hello, how the Xhosa greeting literally means I see you and requires acknowledgement of the other person's full humanity. These weren't just language lessons, they were masterclasses in cultural intelligence. When I started at Pinnacle Energy fresh out of graduate school, I thought everyone would value these insights the way Grandpa Thabo had taught me to value them. I was naive. My colleagues saw my cultural knowledge as an amusing party trick, something to trot out when they needed to impress clients but not substantial enough to warrant real recognition. I remember my first major success, a deal with a Korean conglomerate that was about to fall through because Marcus had unknowingly violated hierarchical protocols during a dinner meeting. He'd addressed the junior executives first, offered business cards with one hand, and sat down before the senior partner had taken his seat. The Koreans were politely furious, and the $50 million contract was hanging by a thread. I spent the entire night crafting an apology letter that acknowledged each specific cultural misstep, explained the inadvertent disrespect, and outlined proper protocols for future interactions. I researched the senior partner's background, learned that his father had been a traditional calligrapher, and arranged for Marcus to present a handwritten apology in Korean alongside a small but meaningful gift honoring that heritage. The Koreans were so impressed by the cultural sensitivity that they not only saved the deal but expanded it to include additional contracts worth another $30 million. Marcus took full credit in the company newsletter, describing his cultural adaptability and global mindset without mentioning the 27-year-old translator who had actually saved his career. That became the pattern. I would prevent disasters and Marcus would claim victories. When a potential partnership with a Brazilian company nearly collapsed because he'd scheduled a crucial meeting during Carnival Week, I quietly rescheduled everything and arranged for the Brazilian executives to receive traditional gifts acknowledging the cultural significance of the celebration. Marcus told the board about his intuitive understanding of Latin American business culture. The South African diamond contract represented the pinnacle of my invisible expertise. Diamond mining equipment for oil drilling operations was a specialized niche, and Mandlam Thembu's company was one of only 3 in the world with the specific technology Pinnacle needed. Landing this contract would establish Pinnacle as a major player in African energy markets. I'd spent weeks preparing for the negotiations, studying not just Thembu's business background but his cultural heritage. I learned that he was Xhosa royalty, descendant of a traditional chief, and that his approach to business was deeply rooted in ancestral protocols. When he requested to conduct portions of the negotiation in Xhosa, I knew this wasn't casual preference, It was a test of respect and cultural understanding. In my 3 years at Pinnacle, I'd facilitated deals worth over $2 billion. I'd prevented 7 major cultural misunderstandings that could have cost the company millions. I'd worked 18-hour days translating contracts, cultural briefings, and emergency communications. I'd missed birthdays, holidays, and countless nights of sleep to ensure Marcus Rodriguez and his team looked competent in boardrooms from Dubai to Beijing. But my contributions went far beyond simple translation. I was Marcus's cultural intelligence, his early warning system, his secret weapon in every negotiation. When we were pursuing a contract with a UAE petroleum company, I researched each executive's tribal affiliations and arranged the seating chart to honor traditional hierarchies that weren't obvious to Western eyes. When a Mexican partnership was stalling, I discovered that the delay coincided with Day of the Dead celebrations and suggested a respectful acknowledgement that transformed the business relationship into something approaching friendship. I maintained detailed cultural profiles for every international contact, tracking their communication preferences, gift-giving protocols, negotiation styles, and cultural sensitivities. I knew that Ahmad in Dubai preferred to conduct serious business discussions after 6 p.m. because of Ramadan schedules. I remembered that Chen Wei in Shanghai considered the number 4 deeply unlucky and adjusted contract terms accordingly. I tracked lunar calendar dates that might affect decision-making in several Asian markets. These weren't academic exercises, they were the difference between success and failure in global business. But to Marcus and the other executives, my work was invisible labor. They saw the successful outcomes but never connected them to the cultural intelligence that made those outcomes possible. When deals closed smoothly, they attributed it to their own negotiation skills. When problems arose, they expected me to fix them quietly, without fanfare or recognition. But to them, I was just overhead. A necessary expense, like office supplies or insurance. When the quarterly reports came out highlighting another record-breaking year, my name appeared nowhere. When Marcus gave interviews about his visionary leadership in global markets, he never mentioned the woman who made those visions possible. My salary was $68,000, less than what some of my colleagues spent on their cars. The inequity wasn't just financial, it was existential. I watched junior executives with half my experience and a quarter of my cultural knowledge get promoted to senior positions while I remained the translator. I watched Marcus present cultural insights I'd researched as his own original thinking. I watched him build a reputation as a global business expert on the foundation of my invisible expertise. The promise of a bonus had kept me going. Marcus had assured me that after the Johannesburg diamond deal closed, there would be substantial recognition for my contributions. The South African contract was massive, a long-term agreement to supply specialized drilling equipment for diamond mining operations, worth over $300 million. The negotiations had been particularly complex because the South African CEO, Mandla Mthembu, preferred conducting business in Xhosa during the most sensitive discussions. While his English was perfect, he explained that speaking in his mother tongue helped him think more clearly about complex terms. Marcus and the other executives found this charming, a colorful quirk that made their South African partner seem more authentic and down-to-earth. They had no idea what they were really agreeing to. During the final negotiation session, conducted via video conference with our team in Houston and Mthembu's team in Johannesburg, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. While the English portions of the contract seemed standard, Mthembu was embedding specific cultural protocols into his Xhosa statements, protocols that weren't appearing anywhere in the English translation being recorded. He spoke of ukulanafa, deep respect that must be shown through specific actions. He outlined traditional courtesy requirements. Any Pinnacle representative visiting South Africa must participate in a formal cultural greeting ceremony with tribal elders. All major announcements about the partnership must be made first to the local community leaders before any public or media disclosure. Most critically, he specified that any changes to the agreement must be discussed face-to-face, in South Africa, following traditional consultation processes. But there was more. As Mthembu continued speaking in Xhosa, his tone became increasingly formal, almost ceremonial. He invoked ancestral blessings on the partnership, but woven into those blessings were additional requirements that chilled me to the bone. He specified that Pinnacle must demonstrate ongoing respect for South African sovereignty by ensuring that all equipment modifications would be approved by local technical committees. He required quarterly cultural exchange visits where Pinnacle executives would meet with community leaders to discuss the partnership's impact on local employment and environmental conditions. Most significantly, he stated that any violation of these cultural protocols would be considered ukundhalonifi, profound disrespect that would bring shame not just to the business relationship, but to his ancestors and his community. In Xhosa culture, this level of disrespect was grounds for immediate and permanent severing of all relationships, with no possibility of reconciliation. These weren't suggestions or nice-to-have additions. In traditional Xhosa business culture, when an elder speaks these words in the presence of witnesses, they become binding obligations. Mthembu was being polite and accommodating in English, but in Xhosa, he was laying down ironclad cultural law that would govern every aspect of the partnership. I frantically took notes, my hands shaking as I realized the magnitude of what was happening. My colleagues sat around the conference table, nodding and smiling at Mthembu's warm tone, completely oblivious to the fact that he was establishing conditions that would be virtually impossible for them to meet without significant cultural preparation and ongoing commitment. I tried to raise this with Marcus immediately after the call. "We need to discuss the cultural requirements that Mr. Mthembu specified in Xhosa," I said, following him toward his office. He barely looked up from his phone. "What about them?" He seemed happy with everything. "The contract is signed, Amara. We're celebrating, not nitpicking." "But Marcus, he specified very particular protocols that we need to follow. If we don't, Amara." He stopped walking and fixed me with that condescending smile I'd learned to hate. "I appreciate your attention to detail, but I've been closing international deals since before you graduated college." Mthembu is a businessman. He cares about profit margins, not cultural ceremonies. I tried again the next day, sending him a detailed email outlining each cultural requirement and explaining the serious consequences of noncompliance. He replied with a single sentence, "Thanks for the cultural color commentary. Let's focus on execution now." I even attempted to reach out to other executives who'd been in the meeting. Tom Martinez listened politely but ultimately shrugged. "Amara, if Marcus isn't worried about it, I'm not going to second-guess him. He's the one with the relationship management responsibility." The legal department dismissed my concerns even more curtly. "If it's not in the English contract, it's not legally binding," the corporate attorney told me. "We can't be held responsible for side conversations in foreign languages." But I knew they were wrong. In international business, especially in Africa, cultural agreements often carry more weight than legal documents. Violating traditional protocols could destroy business relationships in ways that no contract law could repair. I'd seen it happen before. Companies that thought they could ignore cultural sensitivities found themselves permanently blacklisted from entire markets. For 2 weeks, I watched helplessly as Marcus and his team prepared to make exactly the kinds of mistakes that would trigger Mthembu's cultural red lines. They were planning a major press announcement without consulting South African community leaders. They were scheduling equipment modifications without involving local technical committees. They were treating the partnership as a purely transactional relationship instead of the cultural alliance that Mthembu had described in Xhosa. The bonus I'd been promised never materialized. Instead, 2 weeks after the Johannesburg contract was signed, Marcus called me into his office with devastating news. "Amara, I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go. Budget cuts, you understand. The board wants to streamline operations, focus on core competencies." I felt the floor disappear beneath me. "Budget cuts? Marcus, we just signed a $300 million deal. Which is exactly why we can afford to outsource translation services when we need them. We can't justify a full-time position for something we only use occasionally." Occasionally. 3 years of 18-hour days, of missing my sister's wedding to handle an emergency translation, of learning Mandarin in 6 months because a Beijing deal was falling through. Occasionally. "Marcus, you don't understand. The South African contract has specific cultural requirements that. Amara, please. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Your final paycheck will include 2 weeks severance. We'll provide a positive reference. Security escorted me out 20 minutes later, my personal items hastily thrown into a box that barely contained 3 years of my professional life. As I walked through the lobby, I saw my former colleagues averting their eyes, some looking genuinely shocked, others simply relieved it wasn't them. Jennifer from Communications caught up with me in the parking garage. Amara, this is insane. Everyone knows you're the reason half our international deals succeed. Marcus is making a huge mistake. I appreciated her support, but it didn't change my reality. I was unemployed, betrayed, and watching 3 years of expertise walk out the door in a cardboard box. Worse, I knew that Marcus was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the importance of cultural intelligence, and there would be nothing I could do to help him. The first call came on Friday, exactly 13 days after my termination. My friend Jennifer, who still worked in Pinnacle's communications department, texted me, "Did you hear? Marcus is freaking out about something with the South African deal. Emergency meetings all day." By Monday, the story became clearer. Mandla Mthembu had sent a formal communication expressing his deep disappointment with Pinnacle Energy's cultural insensitivity. Apparently, Marcus had announced the partnership in a press release without first consulting with local community leaders in South Africa, violating one of the key protocols Mthembu had specified in COSA. Tuesday brought worse news. Jennifer called me directly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Amara, it's chaos here. Mthembu's lawyers sent a formal notice. They're saying Pinnacle violated cultural agreement terms and they're considering contract termination. Marcus is running around asking everyone if anyone else speaks African languages. Nobody knows what he's talking about." I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. Marcus and his team were finally experiencing what I'd tried to warn them about, the consequences of dismissing cultural nuance as unimportant details. Wednesday afternoon, my former colleague Tom Martinez called. Tom had always been kind to me, one of the few people who'd acknowledged my contributions openly. "Amara, I probably shouldn't be calling you, but I thought you should know. That South African CEO is threatening to pull out of the deal entirely. He's saying we've shown disrespect for traditional protocols." Marcus is beside himself. He keeps asking if we have recordings of the negotiations, but nobody can figure out what cultural requirements the guy is talking about. "Do you know anything about this?" I knew everything about it. But Tom wasn't the one who'd fired me. Thursday brought the call I'd been expecting. Marcus himself, his usual arrogance replaced by barely concealed panic. "Amara, I know things ended awkwardly between us, but I need your help. The Johannesburg deal is in serious trouble. Mthembu is claiming we violated some cultural agreements, but we don't have any record of specific requirements. You were on those calls, do you remember anything unusual?" I let the silence stretch for a long moment. "I tried to tell you about the cultural protocols immediately after the final negotiation, Marcus. You said you didn't want to nitpick. Look, maybe I should have listened more carefully. But this is a $300 million contract. Can you help us figure out what went wrong? I'm afraid I'm quite busy with my new position." New position? The irony was delicious. 3 days after my termination, I'd received an unexpected call from Global Cultural Consulting, a boutique firm that specialized in international business protocol. They'd heard about my departure from Pinnacle, news travels fast in Houston's energy sector, and they were interested in my expertise. The caller was Rebecca Park, GCC's managing director. "Amara, your reputation precedes you. We've had several clients mention your name as someone who really understands the cultural nuances of international business. We're looking for a senior consultant who can help our clients avoid exactly the kind of cultural misunderstandings that cost companies millions." The position came with a salary of $95,000, plus performance bonuses, plus equity in the company. More importantly, it came with respect. Rebecca spoke to me as a professional, as an expert whose insights were valuable, not as a cost center to be eliminated. My first week at GCC, I worked with a tech company preparing to enter the Vietnamese market. Instead of being told my cultural insights were nitpicking, I was asked to lead strategy sessions. Instead of being invisible overhead, I was presented to clients as a key differentiator, someone whose expertise could make or break their international expansion. Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after my termination, Marcus called again. Amara, the situation has escalated. Mthembu wants to meet in person to discuss the cultural violations. He's threatening to terminate the entire contract if we can't demonstrate proper respect for traditional protocols. I need you to come with us to Johannesburg. I'll pay you as a consultant, whatever your rate is. I'm sorry, Marcus. I have commitments to my current clients. Name your price. Seriously. This deal is worth $300 million. It's not about price, Marcus. It's about priorities. And right now, my priority is working with people who value cultural expertise from the beginning, not just when they're in crisis. The desperation in his voice was almost pitiable. Amara, please. I know I made mistakes. I should have listened to you. I should have valued your contributions more. But we can fix this. We can make it right. You had 3 years to make it right, Marcus. You chose not to. Monday morning brought news through Jennifer that Mthembu had indeed terminated the contract. Pinnacle Energy stock dropped 4% on the announcement, wiping out nearly $50 million in market value. Marcus was reportedly in emergency meetings with the board, trying to explain how a sure thing had collapsed so spectacularly. Tuesday, Rebecca asked me to take the lead on a new client, a mining equipment company looking to expand into African markets. The irony wasn't lost on me. We need someone who really understands not just the languages, but the cultural expectations, the client explained during our initial meeting. We've heard horror stories about companies losing massive deals because they didn't show proper respect for local traditions. I spent the next month crafting a comprehensive cultural protocol guide, drawing on everything my grandfather had taught me about respect, dignity, and the importance of honoring traditions. The client was thrilled. They implemented every recommendation, and their South African expansion became a model for cultural sensitivity in international business. 3 months after leaving Pinnacle, I received an unexpected call. It wasn't Marcus this time, it was Mandla Mthembu himself. Ms. Okafor, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I obtained your contact information through mutual business connections. I wanted to express my appreciation for your cultural expertise during our negotiations with Pinnacle Energy. My heart skipped a beat. Mr. Mthembu, I'm honored by your call. I must be honest with you, I was deeply disappointed by Pinnacle's cultural insensitivity following our agreement. However, I was impressed by your clear understanding of traditional protocols during our discussions. You were the only person in that room who truly comprehended what I was communicating in Xhosa. He paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. I understand you're now working with Global Cultural Consulting. My company is expanding our partnerships with American firms, and we need cultural guidance to ensure respectful collaboration. Would you be interested in discussing a consulting arrangement? 6 months later, I was boarding a plane to Johannesburg as the lead cultural consultant for a consortium of American companies seeking partnerships in South Africa. Mandla Mthembu himself met me at the airport, greeting me with traditional honors that made my grandfather's stories come alive. The consulting fees from the South African partnership alone exceeded my entire annual salary at Pinnacle Energy. But more importantly, I was treated as the expert I'd always been, consulted on strategy, included in high-level decisions, recognized publicly for my contributions. One evening in Cape Town, as I watched the sunset over Table Mountain, my phone rang. Marcus Rodriguez appeared on the caller ID. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Amara, I hope you're well. I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not just because I need something. I've had time to reflect on how I treated you, and I was wrong. You were trying to help us succeed, and I was too arrogant to listen. His voice carried a humility I'd never heard before. I know this doesn't change anything, but I wanted you to know that I recognize how valuable you were, and how badly I handled your departure. I appreciate that, Marcus. I really do. I heard about your success with the South African partnerships. The whole industry is talking about your work. I'm genuinely happy for you. Thank you. I don't suppose, no, never mind. You've clearly moved on to better things. What were you going to ask? I was going to ask if there was any chance you might consider coming back to Pinnacle, but I know that's not realistic. You're doing work that actually values your expertise now. For the first time in our conversation, I smiled genuinely. You're right, Marcus. I am. A year later, I was featured on the cover of International Business Quarterly, in an article titled The Cultural Bridge Builders: How Language Experts Are Revolutionizing Global Commerce. The article detailed how cultural misunderstandings cost American companies billions annually, and how specialists like me were helping bridge those gaps. Rebecca had made me a partner at GCC, and we'd expanded to include 12 consultants specializing in different cultural regions. My South African partnerships had grown into a model program that other companies were trying to replicate. The article mentioned Pinnacle Energy as a cautionary tale, a company that had lost a major contract due to cultural insensitivity. Marcus wasn't named personally, but industry insiders knew the story. I kept the magazine on my desk, not out of spite, but as a reminder of something my grandfather had told me in Xhosa when I was young. Umtu ngumtu ngabantu, a person is a person through other people. Your worth isn't determined by whether others recognize it, but by how you use your gifts to build bridges between worlds. At Pinnacle, I had been needed but not valued. At GCC, I was both needed and valued, and that made all the difference. True success didn't come from being indispensable to people who took me for granted. It came from finding people who understood that my expertise was worth investing in, worth celebrating, worth building a future around. The translator's true meaning, I learned, isn't just about converting words from one language to another. It's about knowing your own worth, and insisting that others recognize it too. Some lessons can only be learned in your mother tongue, and some bridges can only be built by those who understand both sides of the river.